I was sitting on the porch in a Florida afternoon, an old photo album, pages yellowed and brittle, spread across my knees. Sunlight poured through the gaps in the oak leaves and fell across my hands now mapped with wrinkles, trembling a little even when all I did was lift a coffee cup. It's hard to imagine that 80 years ago, these same hands controlled the deadliest, most elegant war machine in human history, dancing with death at 30,000 feet. In the photograph, there's a fighter with the number 44-73652 on its fuselage. The skin isn't covered in camouflage paint. It's bare duralumin, shining in the sun with a blinding silver glare. The nose is painted in a bold red and yellow checkerboard. That was our squadron's marking. The sleek fuselage looks like a bullet poised to be fired. The drop tanks slung beneath the wings make it seem a bit bulky, but I knew those were the secret that let it cross an ocean and strike at the enemy's heart. This was the P-51 Mustang. People like to say the war ended because of the atomic bomb, but in the hearts of us old guys, Japan's spine was already broken before those two mushroom clouds rose into the sky. And what broke it was us and the tireless Mustangs we rode. To tell this story properly, I have to wind the clock back to 1943, to New Guinea. Back then, I hadn't even touched the stick of a P-51. I was flying a P-40 Warhawk. For pilots of the U.S. Army Air Forces, the Pacific was a nightmare. Our enemy was the Imperial Japanese Navy's Zero fighter. For a long time, the word Zero on the radio was enough to make everyone's stomach clench. I remember a dawn in May 1943. The air over Port Moresby was so humid you could wring water out of it. My wingman Bill and I had been ordered to intercept a formation of incoming Japanese bombers. "Contact, 2 o'clock high, Zeeks," Bill screamed over the radio, Zeke being the Allied code name for the Zero. I looked up, squinting into the dagger-like sunlight until my eyes watered. A few black dots were drifting down like falling leaves. That was the Zero's signature move. Before I could haul up the nose of my lumbering P-40, a stream of 20mm tracer shells lashed past me like a whip. The P-40 was rugged, heavily armored, a flying tank, but it was heavy as sin, slow to climb, with a big turning radius. The Japanese Zero? God, that thing was like it was folded out of paper, impossibly light. In a low-altitude dogfight, a Zero could dance circles around us. We were clumsy bears, swatting at flies. "Don't turn with them. Dive. Use your weight. Dive," the squadron leader roared in my headphones. That was our deadly survival rule. Hit and run. Our only real advantage was in the dive. If a Zero latched onto your tail, your one way out was to slam the throttle forward, shove the nose down, and let gravity sling you away. If you hesitated for even a second, tried to pull up or turn level, the Zero would stick to you like a leech until it turned you into a ball of fire. That day, I watched Bill's airplane get bounced right in front of me. He tried a hard turn to shake the enemy. That was his fatal mistake. The Zero, dark green camouflage, bright red sun discs on the wings, made a light, effortless Immelmann and slid neatly inside his turn. A short burst tore his wing to pieces. No parachute ever opened. When we limped back to base, the crew chief cursed under his breath as he patched the bullet holes in my fuselage. "Damn it, can't we get something decent to fly? Just give me a bird that can climb worth a damn." That sense of helplessness sank deep into my bones. By then, the P-38 Lightning was already making a name for itself, using its twin-engine speed to hunt down Yamamoto himself. But for most of us single-engine fighter jocks, we were still on the back foot. We were desperate for a new airplane, one that could outrun the Zero, outclimb it, hold its own in a turn, and above all, fly far enough to carry the fight all the way to Japan's doorstep. At the time, I had no idea that on the far side of the Pacific, in California, a miracle had already been born. Later, I was lucky enough to be selected to return to the States as an instructor candidate for a new fighter. At North American's plant, I heard the origin story of the Mustang, a story that circulated among pilots like a legend. The birth of that airplane was a giant irony and one of the biggest gambles in industrial history. It was 1940. Europe was on fire and the Royal Air Force was being hammered under the Nazi boot. The British Purchasing Commission crossed the Atlantic with pockets full of gold and went to North American aviation. Their request was simple. They needed airplanes, and they needed them yesterday. Could North American license build the Curtiss P-40 for them? North American's president at the time was James Dutch Kindleberger. He was a visionary businessman and a fanatic for technology. He looked at the P-40 blueprints the British brought and shook his head. The P-40 is yesterday's airplane, he supposedly told them. It's based on an old design philosophy. If all you want is a P-40, we can build it. But I've got a better idea. Give me a little time, and I'll design you a brand new fighter. Lighter, faster, better than the P-40. The Brits were skeptical. How long would that take you? 120 days, Kindleberger said, holding up his fingers. In 120 days, I'll roll out a prototype. It was a crazy promise. In those days, it normally took years to design a new fighter, but Kindleberger had an ace up his sleeve, Edgar Schmood. Schmood was both a genius and an oddball. Born in Germany, a veteran of the German Air Arm in the Great War, he'd emigrated to the United States. He had a near-instinctive feel for aerodynamics. For the next 120 days, the lights in North American's design office never went out. Schmood and his team worked like men possessed. They introduced a revolutionary idea, the laminar flow wing. Traditional wings had their greatest thickness near the leading edge, which made the airflow break up into turbulent eddies and increased drag. Schmood's laminar flow wing moved the thickest point farther back, letting air slide more smoothly over the surface and drastically cutting drag. That meant, with the same engine, the airplane could fly faster. His other masterstroke was the radiator under the belly. Schmood exploited the Meredith effect, turning the radiator into a sort of ducted tunnel. Air entered, cooled the engine coolant, heated up, expanded, and then rushed out the back, adding a bit of thrust while solving the cooling problem. On October 26, 1940, just as the deadline loomed, the first prototype, NA-73X, was rolled out of the hangar. It didn't even have an engine yet, but that sleek silhouette already screamed potential. But the early Mustangs, then known as the A-36 or P-51A, weren't legends yet. They had a heart problem. At first, the Mustang was fitted with the Allison V1710 liquid-cooled engine. It was fine down low, with good performance under 15,000 feet, but its power fell off sharply at altitude. So the early Mustangs were stuck with the dirty work, ground attack and low-level stuff, nicknamed Apache or Invader. If the story had ended there, the Mustang might have gone down as just another mediocre attack plane. History turned on a coincidence. When the British got their first Mustangs, they praised its handling and range, but shook their heads at its lack of high-altitude performance. That's when a British test pilot named Ronald Harker proposed a bold idea. This airframe is perfect. What if we give it a Spitfire's heart? He meant the Rolls-Royce Merlin. In the States, Packard Motor Car Company licensed the Merlin and started mass-producing it as the Packard Phi 1650. Unlike the Allison, it had a two-stage, two-speed supercharger that got stronger as the air got thinner. The moment engineers shoehorned that brutal new heart into the Mustang's nose and bolted on a four-bladed prop, magic happened. The P-51B was born. Its top speed jumped to about 440 miles per hour. Its service ceiling soared past 40,000 feet. It could not only outrun almost anything, it could outclimb it too. But that still wasn't enough. To improve visibility, North American cut down the raised rear fuselage and gave the Mustang a perfect teardrop bubble canopy. That was the P-51D, the version I would come to fly. From then on, pilots had a true 360-degree field of view. That was the warhorse I was going to ride. It was the combined masterpiece of American and British industry, the perfect fusion of aerodynamics and lethal beauty. In early 1944, I returned to the States and went to a base in Florida for P-51 transition training. The first time I saw a P-51D, I walked around it 3 full times like an idiot. Compared to the bulldog snout of the P-40, the Mustang's nose was as refined as a piece of art. The skin was flush-riveted, smooth under the hand as silk. The big 4-bladed prop stood there quietly, radiating raw power. "Don't let that pretty face fool you, Lieutenant," my instructor said, a veteran who'd flown P-51Bs in Europe. He slapped my shoulder. "This thing's got more muscle than you think. If you don't stomp the rudder on takeoff, that torque will flip you right off the runway." I climbed into the cockpit with a kind of reverence. The bubble canopy felt glorious, like sitting on top of the world. The instrument panel bristled with gauges and dials, but to me, it was the most beautiful sheet music I'd ever seen. I'll never forget the moment I started the engine. It wasn't the crude roar of the P-40, it was a deep, precise, rhythmic snarl. The 12 cylinders of the V1650 Merlin came alive, pouring 1,600 horsepower down the drive shaft into that giant propeller. The whole airframe shivered, as if it, too, had just taken a breath. We rolled, we accelerated. The thrust pinned me to the seat back. Just as my instructor had warned, the massive torque tried to twist the airplane left. I had to stand on the right rudder. The instant the wheels left the runway and the gear folded away, the Mustang was free. I nudged the throttle forward, and the airplane answered instantly. How do I describe that feeling? If flying the P-40 was driving a fully loaded truck, flying the P-51 was riding a lightning bolt. I pulled back, climbing. The needle on the altimeter spun like a mad thing. 10,000 feet, 20,000, 30,000. A P-40 would have been gasping for breath up here, but the Mustang's engine was still pulling hard. I cranked into a tight turn. The G-forces dragged the skin off my face, but I didn't gray out. The laminar flow wing sliced the air. The airplane carved the sky like a surgeon's scalpel. But what stunned me most was the range. In the briefing room, the CO pointed at a map. "Gentlemen, with internal fuel plus 2 75-gallon drop tanks, this airplane will keep you in the air for 7-8 hours. You know what that means?" He traced a long line from the Marianas, straight into the heart of Japan. "It means you're no longer just defending bases. You're going hunting. You will fly to Tokyo itself and shoot them out of their own sky." In that moment, I realized the rules of the game had changed. By late 1944, I'd been assigned to 7th Fighter Command, and soon after, we deployed to Iwo Jima, freshly taken at terrible cost by the Marines. Iwo Jima, that sulfur-reeking barren volcanic rock, had a strategic value nothing else could touch. It lay right between the B-29 bases in the Marianas and Tokyo. Before that, B-29 superfortresses flying from Guam or Saipan had to cross thousands of miles of ocean alone to bomb Japan. No fighter could fly that far. By the time those lumbering bombers reached Japanese airspace, enemy interceptors were waiting like wolves for sheep. Our losses were brutal. Then the Mustang arrived. Our mission was simple and merciless: full-time escort. They called these very long-range missions, VLR, close to 8 hours in the cockpit, on the edge of physical and mental endurance. We sat in that cramped seat for something like an entire workday, nerves wound tight, then fought for our lives over the target, and finally dragged our exhausted bodies back across an endless ocean. I remember the night before my first VLR sortie. The tent was heavy with silence. Men wrote last letters home or quietly wiped down their revolvers. My new wingman was a freckle-faced kid from Texas named Tommy. He asked hesitantly, "Sir, are the Japanese really as fearsome as they say? I've heard all kinds of stuff about their Bushido." I wiped my goggles and looked at him. "Tommy, in 1942, yeah, They were terrifying. Their planes were better, their pilots more experienced. But it's 1945 now. Remember two things. I held up two fingers. First, that airplane under your ass is the best fighter in the world. It's 100 kilometers an hour faster than a Zero, and your 6.50 cals will shred anything they fly. Second, you're not fighting the guys who hit Pearl Harbor. Most of those hot shots are fish food now. Today you're up against kids with maybe 100 hours in the air, if that. How do we fight them? He asked. You keep your speed and your altitude. Never bleed off energy to turn with them. You use your energy. You fight like an eagle, dive, fire, and climb away. If they try to follow you up, their engines will choke, and your Merlin will walk away from them. I thumped his helmet. You're the hunter, they're the prey. Got it? April 7th, 1945. A date burned into history. We took off before dawn. Dust boiled along Iwo Jima's runway as hundreds of P-51Ds thundered into the sky, then formed a great flock and swept north. 3 hours of silence. Aside from the occasional voice checking a course correction over the radio, there was only the monotone hum of engines. The ocean below was an endless bolt of blue silk. Long flights like that hypnotize you. You have to pinch yourself, drink water, roll your shoulders, anything to stay awake. At last, land loomed on the horizon. Japan. Mount Fuji's white peak drifted in and out of the clouds. Above, a vast formation of B-29s, silver whales, moved slowly and majestically toward their target. Bandits spotted 12 o'clock low. The calm in the headphones snapped. I looked down. Sure enough, black specks boiling up from the clouds like angry hornets. Japanese Army Ki-61 Tony fighters and Navy N-1K-2J Shidenkai Georgias. Jettison tanks! I yanked the release handles. The big metal drums dropped from my wings and tumbled toward Japanese soil. Unburdened, the Mustang suddenly felt feather-light, as if we'd clawed off 1,000 pounds. Commence attack! I pushed the nose down. The Merlin let out a joyful howl. The airspeed needle leapt past 400 miles per hour. This time, it wasn't that desperate dive and run of the P-40 days. This was a predator's dive, full of control and command. My target was a Ki-61 clawing upward toward a B-29. The Tony was a liquid-cooled inline fighter, not a bad-looking airplane, but too slow for my Mustang. The Japanese pilot clearly hadn't expected us to drop from that high. When he finally saw me, he tried to crank into a tight turn. 2 years earlier, I would have watched him spin away out of reach. But now, I rolled with him and pulled. The P-51D had another trick up its sleeve, the G-suit. That was near science fiction then. As the G-forces climbed, air bladders in the suit inflated, squeezing my legs and abdomen, keeping blood from draining away and my brain from going dark. I could ride more G than a Japanese pilot could. I tightened the turn until I was inside his circle. The K-14 gyro gun sight, another miracle, did the math for me. When that orange ring wrapped neatly around the Tony's fuselage, I squeezed the trigger. 6 Browning M2 heavy machine guns opened up at once. Ma Deuce, the old warhorse. Their real power wasn't explosive shells, but sheer volume and penetration. In an instant, the root of the Japanese fighter's wing looked like it had gone through a bandsaw. Aluminum peeled away, sparks flew. Then I hit his fuel tank. He blossomed into a ball of orange fire. I pulled up, riding the energy of the dive, rocketing back toward the blue. When I glanced back, that burning ball was tumbling toward Tokyo's streets. That was energy fighting. That was the Mustang's dominance. In that moment, I understood how aces like Jerry Yellen of the 15th Fighter Group put up such insane scores. It wasn't just our skill, it was the fact that the fight had become one-sided slaughter. Our airplanes were faster, tougher, and hit harder. Our gun sights were better. Our radios worked. As for the Japanese, in the melee that followed, I saw something that shocked me. A Zero tried to get on Tommy's tail. He panicked and did nothing fancy, just rammed the throttle forward and went into a shallow dive. In the old days, the Zero would have run him down, or at least stayed glued to him. But as that Zero tried to chase, its engine suddenly belched black smoke, and it started to fall behind. Later, we found out that was Japan's entire aviation industry coming apart. By the end of the war, they were starved of high-octane fuel. They were burning lousy mixtures, even pine root oil. That stuff didn't just cripple engine performance, it blew them apart. Their engines, once hand-built works of art, were now slapped together in factories full of students and housewives. The rare alloys were gone, and the skilled machinists were long since drafted and buried, so that Zero wasn't shot down. It was dying on its own. Watching it sag out of formation, coughing smoke, I felt no pity. I thought of Bill and the friends we'd lost over New Guinea. "Tommy, he's yours," I said coldly over the radio. "Finish him." Tommy rolled, swung around, and fired a short burst. The Zero exploded in midair. That day, our squadron downed 8 aircraft without a single loss. The group's overall tally was even bloodier. However blue the sky looked, it belonged to the Mustang Silver. As summer 1945 approached, our job got more aggressive. We weren't just escorting anymore, we were sweeping. This is when Japan really learned to fear us. We dropped lower, hunting everything that moved. Airplanes on airfields, trains on tracks, ships in harbors, trucks on roads. That's when I truly saw what air supremacy meant. If you read the combat reports of Major James Tapp, the first P-51 ace in the Pacific, you'll see how many of his kills were on the ground as much as in the air. Once we were ordered to hit an airfield near Tokyo. The Japanese weren't stupid. They hid their airplanes in revetments and under trees. It didn't help. We dropped from 10,000 feet in screaming dives. The flak was thick, but we were moving too fast for them to track properly. I saw a line of Ki 84 Hayate fighters revving for takeoff. The Hayate was one of their better late-war designs. If they'd gotten airborne, they would have been trouble. We weren't about to give them that chance. I was led, 4 Mustangs tucked in behind me. We came in like a plow, cutting down the runway. The 50 caliber rounds stitched 2 walls of dust and sparks, a moving curtain of death. The Hayates never left the ground. One just managed to lift its nose before my wingman's burst tore its wing clean off. It cartwheeled across the field and exploded. It was a massacre. There was no sky left where Japan was safe. Another time, heading home, we ran into a lone Japanese bomber, a G-4M Betty. The pilot clearly saw us, but he made no evasive moves. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe he knew it was useless. He just held level until we took turns tearing his airplane apart. In that moment, I realized Japan's air arm wasn't just beaten, it was broken. Their pilots were barely trained. The veterans were gone, and green kids who'd only flown in mock-up cockpits were being shoved into fighters. Their airplanes, starved of proper alloys, were fragile junk. Their fuel couldn't even sustain a decent dogfight. We, on the other hand, were flying P-51s built from the best aluminum, drinking the best high-octane fuel. Our pilots had at least 300 hours of stateside training under their belts, cans of beef and chocolate in their bellies, and the world's greatest logistical tail behind them. That was industrial power, grinding a foe into dust. The P-51 Mustang was the tip of that spear. In May 1945, the wind in the Pacific shifted, not just in the weather reports, but in the war's cruelty. If earlier we'd been knights dueling at 30,000 feet, now we were climbing off our horses and slogging through the mud. General Curtis LeMay changed the B-29 strategy from high-altitude precision raids to low-level night firebombing. Our orders shifted too. seek out and destroy every military target on the ground. We called it broomstick duty. We were to sweep Japan's air power straight into the trash. It was a morning in mid-May. Our squadron was tasked to hit Kyushu. That island was a nest of kamikaze units, riddled with makeshift airstrips like tumors. Listen up, boys. The briefing room was grim. Intelligence says they're massing hundreds of airplanes there for suicide attacks on our fleet off Okinawa. Our job is not to wait for them to take off. We're going to nail them to the ground. Those missions were more dangerous than dogfights. Down low, even a farmer's rifle could kill you. Worse, the P-51 had one glaring Achilles heel, its liquid-cooled radiator. We called it the glass jaw. That big scoop under the belly was our lifeline. One stray bullet through the coolant lines, and our sophisticated Merlin would turn into a glowing paperweight in minutes. A P-47 Thunderbolt could limp home missing a couple of cylinders. We couldn't, but the rush of those ground attack runs was something I'll never forget. Over Kyushu, I shoved the nose down. The altimeter unwound like a clock in a hurricane. 8,000 feet, 5,000, 1,000. Houses, trees, rivers surged up at me like a newsreel in fast forward. Target in sight, Omura Airfield, 2 o'clock. I saw the runway, lined with airplanes parked wingtip to wingtip. Some didn't even have camouflage netting over them yet. Stay with me. Attack. We had only seconds. I dropped the sight onto a row of G4M Betty bombers. My finger clamped down on the trigger. The 6 heavy machine guns shook the whole airplane. At that altitude, I could see every impact, bullets chewing up the ground, wings shredding, fuel spraying out and flashing into orange fireballs. Flak rose off the ground like holiday fireworks. Black bursts popped around my canopy. Fragments hit the fuselage with the rattle of hail on a tin roof. Pull up! Pull up! At the very end of the runway, I yanked the stick back. The G-forces crushed me into the seat. The world dimmed to gray. When I clawed my way out of the flak and looked back, the airfield was a sheet of fire, black smoke spearing into the sky. The Japanese Empire's blood set aflame. That was the P-51 as a ground attack beast. We were too fast for most gunners. By the time they got their barrels around, all we left behind was wreckage. Back on Iwo, my crew chief pointed at a bullet hole 2 inches from the radiator. His face was pale. Another hair to the left, Lieutenant, and you'd be planting rice in Kyushu right now. I lit a cigarette. My hands were shaking, but my heart felt cold. I knew every airplane we destroyed on the ground meant hundreds of sailors off Okinawa might see another sunrise. The ground fire chilled me. But it wasn't as terrifying as what we met in the sky next. The crazies. By June 45, the Japanese had thrown out everything we understood about air combat. It wasn't skill or energy or tactics anymore. It was kamikaze. Those pilots no longer tried to live. Their planes were stuffed with explosives and often had jettisonable landing gear. They had one goal: impact, smash into our bombers or dive into our ships. Intercepting those madmen in the air was a test of nerves more than anything. Once, escorting B-29s toward Osaka, we met a strange gaggle of enemy aircraft. Not Zeros or Tonys, but biplanes, and even bright orange trainer planes. Hell, are those flight school trainers? Tommy yelped. They're throwing those in too? Don't underestimate them. Those are suicide planes, I shouted. They were painfully slow, and that was a problem. The Mustang was too fast. If I didn't throttle all the way back and drop some flaps, I'd flash past them and wind up in front of their guns. I picked out a Kai-27 or Kai-43, some old fighter with a bomb slung under it. Maybe the kid flying it still had baby fat on his face, but he never took his eyes off the B-29s ahead. He didn't turn, didn't jink, moving like a zombie with a single obsession. That absolute disregard for death was nauseating. Go to hell, I muttered, easing the nose up into firing position. 300 yards. I fired. It was an execution. The airplane had no armor, no self-sealing tanks. I didn't need AP rounds. My burst tore the little plane apart. Wood and fabric fluttered away like paper scraps. I felt no thrill, only a sick heaviness. This wasn't war. It was slaughter. Those old men in Tokyo were stuffing barely trained boys into flying coffins, teaching them only how to arm their bombs, then sending them on one-way trips. On another patrol, I met something even worse, the Oka. It was a rocket-powered suicide glider carried beneath a bomber. The Allies called it Baka, Japanese for idiot. I saw a Betty with a smooth white cylinder under its belly, stubby wings sticking out. Suddenly the thing dropped, its tail erupting in flame. It leapt forward at a speed even my Mustang couldn't match, streaking into the distance like a guided missile. Damn it, we can't stop that thing. Rage boiled in me. If I couldn't catch the rocket, I could destroy the mother that carried it. I poured all my fury into that G4M. The Merlin howled as I dove like a hunting falcon. The tail gunner's tracers zipped past, but I didn't flinch. I trusted my armored windscreen. I trusted my guns. I walked my fire across both engines until they were blazing. The bomber rolled and spiraled into the sea. I felt nothing. A regime that sends its youth to die like that deserves only annihilation. That bloody summer, a rumor crept around the officers' club on Iwo, 13-1. That was the 7th Fighter Command's kill ratio. 13 enemy airplanes destroyed for every Mustang we lost. Unprecedented in the history of air combat. That miracle wasn't just the airplane. It was men like Major James Tapp. I'd seen Tapp at a few briefings. He wasn't flashy, quiet, steady, even scholarly. He was the first P-51 ace on VLR missions in the Pacific. At a tactics meeting on handling the N1K2 Shidenkai, Tapp stood at the blackboard. "Gentlemen," he said, voice calm and steady, "the Shidenkai is one of the few decent cards the Japanese still hold. It has automatic combat flaps, turns like a devil, and carries 4 20mm cannon. If you dogfight it at low speed, you will die." He drew 2 lines on the board. But above 20,000 feet, its performance drops off. Its engine isn't reliable. Your job is to keep a clear speed advantage. Turn the fight into a physics problem. Use your kinetic energy to beat their potential energy. If you miss, don't turn back. Use your speed to extend, climb, and go again. Tapp wasn't just talk. He lived those principles. In that famous turkey shoot over Tokyo, I watched him in action. Roughly 80 Mustangs against a larger number of Japanese interceptors. A Mustang near me was being bracketed, Tapp's wingman, with 2 Tonys closing in. Then I saw a silver Mustang ignite the sky, dropping down like a bolt of lightning. That was Tapp. He didn't waste ammo hosing the fuselage. He aimed a perfect deflection shot. His burst sliced the control cables in the first Tony's tail. Without leveling out, he rolled through a crushing high G maneuver, popping out under the second Tony's blind spot at its rear quarter. A half-second burst. Fireball. The whole sequence was as smooth as a piano solo. 2 kills in under a minute. That's why our ratio was 13-1. We had men like Tapp and Jerry Yellen turning air combat into science and art. And on the other side, we could hear Japanese pilots panicking over the radio. Sometimes we watched their wings snap off mid-turn. "Look at that Hayate," Tommy laughed over the air one day. "I haven't even fired and his gear just fell out." That was the sound of a collapsing industry. With no good rivets, no strong alloys, no skilled workers, those airplanes rolled out of the factory as defective. Against American pilots flying meticulously built and maintained P-51s, there was no such thing as a fair fight. By July 1945, Japanese skies were nearly empty. We cruised over Tokyo Bay, Osaka, Nagoya at will. Sometimes, out of boredom, we dropped low to look at the charred ruins the B-29s had left behind. Those cities were hellscapes. Where bustling streets once stood, there was only a black skeleton of ruins. Wooden houses had burned to ash, leaving solitary chimneys standing like gravestones. Even then, Japan didn't surrender. Our missions grew pettier and more brutal. We hit anything that moved: locomotives, trucks, even small fishing boats at sea. Intelligence said they were sneaking troops and weapons around on those boats. Once, over the inland sea, we spotted a small wooden vessel. "Check it out," the CO ordered. I dropped low. The men on board panicked and ripped back a tarp to reveal an anti-aircraft gun underneath, desperately slewing toward me. "Damn!" I pulled up, rolled, and came back in on a firing pass. In seconds, the 50 cals turned that boat into splinters. That was Japan in the end, a nation where everyone was a soldier and everyone became ash. Around then, I saw just how far their air arm had decayed, not just in planes and training, but in fuel. One day, I shot down a Raiden, a heavy interceptor meant for B-29s. On paper, it was a formidable fighter. In the air that day, it moved like a drunk. When my rounds punched into its tanks, there was no bright orange fireball, just thick, greasy black smoke and a strange stench: pine root oil. We learned after the war that our submarine blockade had strangled their oil supply. In desperation, they sent old folks and children into the hills to dig up pine roots, distilling tarry fuel to pour into aircraft. The octane rating was abysmal. It fouled and corroded engines. That Japanese pilot was probably praying with every breath that his engine wouldn't cough itself to death before he got a shot. I thought back to 1941, when the smoke over Pearl Harbor stained the sky and the Zero was the terror of the world, the longest-ranged, most agile fighter in existence. Barely 4 years later, its successors were flying on tree root oil, flimsy, badly built, and doomed to die under the guns of P-51s. This wasn't just an airplane's victory. It was Detroit's assembly lines beating the swordsmith's forge, Texas oil beating pine roots, modern industrial civilization grinding fanatical militarism into dust. But even with the skies ours, the sea remained our deadliest enemy. Every VLR mission was a fight against human limits. 8 hours in a tiny cockpit is misery you can't explain to someone who hasn't done it. Your backside goes numb, your legs cramp. The cold at altitude seeps into your bones. Down low, the heat makes you sweat through your clothes. We munched Benzedrine tablets to stay sharp. The worst part was the trip home. You'd just survived a life-and-death dogfight, adrenaline burned out of your system, and crushing fatigue rolled in, and still you had 1,000 miles of ocean to cross. Nothing is as demoralizing as watching the fuel gauge sink toward empty with nothing but water in all directions. I'll never forget red-haired Steve. It was late July, on the way back from a mission. "I think I've got a fuel leak," Steve said calmly over the radio. "Probably caught a flak fragment." We formed up around him. A fine mist of fuel trailed from his right wing. "Switch tanks, Steve. Go to your fuselage tank." "Already did. I think the pump's quitting." We watched his RPM drop. With 200 miles still to go, his propeller slowed and then stopped entirely, a dead cross in front of the nose. "I'm going in, boys." "Bail out! For God's sake, jump!" I shouted. "Too low, and you know I'm terrified of sharks." He actually chuckled. "Tell my mom I did okay." A P-51 might be sleek in the air, but that big scoop under the belly dug into the ocean like a shovel. His Mustang hit the waves like a stone, flipped, and vanished into the black-blue water. No raft. No flare. I screamed in my cockpit until my throat burned. I'd just shot down 2 Japanese fighters, but I couldn't save my friend. That night, I sat by Steve's empty bunk until dawn. I picked up his guitar, the one he used to play St. Louis Blues on outside the tent. That was our war, the Mustang pilots' war. We weren't just fighting the Japanese. We were fighting distance, exhaustion, and mechanical fate. Over that vast ocean, every drop of fuel was blood, every engine vibration a heartbeat. It didn't scare us off. It hardened us. Every dawn, when the crew rolled 44-73652 out of the revetment and the light caught the checkerboard nose, I wiped my eyes and climbed back in, because I knew the war wasn't over. That stubborn little island nation was still clawing. As long as they refused to surrender, our Mustangs would circle over their heads, pounding nails into fascism's coffin. And the final nail was more dramatic and more terrible than any of us imagined. Early August 1945, the air over Iwo Jima felt strange. There was a tension like standing at the edge of a cliff. We kept flying our broom missions, but it felt like something huge, beyond our understanding, was moving behind the scenes. The B-29 boys grew tight-lipped. Rumors swirled about Tinian, a mysterious 509th Composite Group, B-29s specially modified, turrets removed, dedicated to carrying some special cargo. On August 6th, as we were returning from a sweep over Honshu, we heard frantic, garbled Japanese radio transmissions. I didn't understand the language, but sheer panic needs no translation. Back at base, the intel officer gathered us. His face was a mix of awe and fear. "Hiroshima is gone," he said. "What do you mean, gone? Burned?" someone asked. "No, gone, in the physical sense. One bomb, just one." The habits we'd built in our cockpits fell apart in our minds. We were used to hundreds of B-29s dropping thousands of tons of incendiaries to level a city. Now they were saying one airplane, one bomb. It made our Mustangs feel not useless exactly, but strangely small. If one bomb could end the war, what did all our previous fights mean? What had our dead brothers died for? 3 days later, Nagasaki suffered the same fate. Even then, Japan didn't surrender. Their stubbornness was inhuman. Those few days over Japan were the wildest and most dangerous yet. The Japanese High Command seemed to believe this was their final battle. They dragged out everything that would still move, from caves and forests and hidden airstrips. Every time I looked at my drop tanks, I wondered, is this the last time? History loves cruel timing. The worst losses often come the instant before peace. That's the story of Captain Jerry Yellen and his wingman, Philip Schlamberg. The most heartbreaking thing I ever witnessed. August 14th, 1945. That morning, we had no official word of a ceasefire. Rumors said the emperor was recording a surrender speech, but a soldier has one rule. Until the order comes, the war goes on. Our mission was to hit a string of airfields near Tokyo, where we'd been told suicide planes were massing for one last strike on our fleet. I flew on the right of the main formation, not far from Yellen's foreship. The cloud deck was thick, visibility was lousy. We punched through and dropped over the target. The flak raging up at us looked nothing like a beaten nation. This was a wounded animal's last bite. "Targets acquired, attack!" We pushed over. The Mustangs screamed down, the air itself shrieking around our canopies. I saw Zeros trying to take off. My finger found the trigger almost on its own. The 50s turned the runway into a furnace. I hauled back, watched the explosions roll behind me, and felt only bone-deep exhaustion. "Enough," I whispered to myself. "Let it be enough." Then a code came across the radio I'd never heard before. "Utah, Utah, Utah." Highest priority. It meant the war is over. Cease all attacks, return to base, over, just like that? My hand slipped off the stick, my palm was slick with sweat. I wanted to shout, to laugh, but my throat closed up. Then I looked out the canopy. The fight hadn't stopped. That code may have reached headquarters and squadron leaders, but not every pilot, and certainly not the men on the ground. Japanese gunners were still throwing everything they had into the sky. I saw Yellen's wingman, 19-year-old Philip Schlamberg, still locked into his attack run. "Philip, pull up, the war's over." I wanted to scream into the net, but I didn't know what frequency he was on. Maybe he heard, maybe not. Maybe he was lost in the clouds. Maybe flak found him. All I know is that as peace finally arrived, I watched a silver Mustang vanish into cloud and fire. He never pulled up. He was one of the last American pilots to die in World War II. When we landed back on Iwo, ground crews threw their hats in the air, beer sprayed everywhere. Some men sobbed, some laughed, some fell to their knees and prayed. Jerry Yellen climbed out of his Mustang, took off his helmet, and didn't smile. He stared at the empty spot where his wingman's plane should have been, his eyes hollow. The war was over. For Philip, it was frozen forever in that last second. That's when I understood something. Behind the numbers we were so proud of, the gleaming 13-to-1 kill ratio, the thousands of Japanese airplanes shot down, stood countless young lives like Philip's. The P-51 Mustang was a perfect killing machine, but inside it sat flesh and blood, men who hurt and bled and died. On August 15, 1945, at noon, the Emperor's voice echoed from radios across the land. After that, a strange calm settled over the Pacific sky. We kept flying patrols, but it was no longer a hunt. It was a watch. I flew my Mustang over Tokyo Bay, over Yokosuka. In the past, my mere presence there would have pulled up a storm of flak. Now the ground was silent. I dropped low enough to see the colors of people's clothes. I rocked my wings. Look, this is the P-51 Mustang. We used to be your nightmare. Now we own your sky. We still stayed sharp. The war was over on paper, but we knew there might be crazy samurai who refused to surrender. It happened rarely. Most Japanese airplanes had their propellers removed and were lined up along runways, waiting for bulldozers to crush them. Looking down at once fearsome Zeros, Hayats, Shidenkai fighters piled like scrap, I felt a strange sadness. They'd been good airplanes, with decent fuel, better materials, and trained pilots. The war might have lasted much longer. But against the Mustang and the industrial giant behind it, they were always doomed to be tragic supporting actors. September 2nd, 1945. The Mustang's finest hour and the pinnacle of my flying life. On that day, aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, the surrender ceremony took place. General MacArthur stood on the deck. Above him, we were about to stage the largest aerial review in human history. Show of Force, that was the code name. We assembled over Chiba Prefecture. I still remember the sight. 462 B-29s, mountains of metal drifting across the sky. Below them, waves of Navy F-6F Hellcats and F-4U Corsairs, and our own P-51 Mustangs from the Army Air Forces. Thousands of engines drumming together, a roar so vast it seemed to make the sea itself vibrate. Then it was our turn to pass. I pushed the throttle and held the formation tight. My P-51D gleamed in the sunlight, checkerboard nose bright and proud. As we flew over the Missouri, I glanced down. From up there, the battleship looked like a toy model. The deck was packed shoulder to shoulder, Allied officers, and that frail Japanese foreign minister in his tails, leaning on a cane. I felt no triumph or vengeance, just the weight of history. We had won. Not just because we had the bomb, not just because we could drown the enemy in supplies. We had won because we had machines like the P-51 and the free spirits willing to master them. This airplane had been conceived in British desperation, designed in 120 days by a German-born genius, powered by a Rolls-Royce Hart, built by American factories in Detroit, and flown by kids trained in Texas, California, and Florida. It was the distilled essence of Allied cooperation, a miracle of engineering. After we crossed Tokyo Bay, the formation broke up and headed home. On the radio, for the first time in years, I heard voices full of simple human dreams. Man, I want an ice-cold beer tonight. I'm going home to see my fiancée. The picture she sent me is practically worn through. I'm going to college. Engineering, I want to build cars. That was who we were. We weren't born killers. We were civilians, students, workers, farmers. To stop evil, we put on flight suits and climbed into cramped cockpits, turned ourselves into hunters in the sky. Now the war was over. We were going home. Decades have passed. I closed the album on my lap. The Florida sun has sunk below the horizon, and the air smells faintly of jasmine. That P-51D with the number 44-73652 was probably scrapped long ago, turned into pots and pans or window frames. But in my dreams, she's always brand new. Whenever I shut my eyes, I can still hear the Merlin Phi 1650 coughing to life, still smell the mix of fuel, hydraulic oil, and sweat in the cockpit, still feel the G-forces pressing me into the seat as I pull for altitude. History books will tell you the P-51 Mustang was the finest piston-engined fighter of the Second World War. They'll list the cold facts. Top speed 703 kilometers per hour, range 2,655 kilometers, 4,950 enemy aircraft destroyed, a kill ratio of 13-1. But to us veterans, it was more than numbers. It was a brother, a guardian angel. It carried us across the widest ocean, helped us break the back of a fanatical empire, and then brought us safely home. In that dark age when fascism tried to drag the world into night, it was this Mustang, with aluminum wings and a Merlin's roar, that ripped the clouds apart and let the light of freedom shine down on Earth again.